MTTB Music Podcast.
Is that the tune?
It's not very Christmassy, isn't it?
I say this practically every other year. We should put some jingle bells on the back of that, you know, as it comes in.
Post-production?
Post-production. Oh, they're there. He said, assuming you'd put them in.
Or not. Ho, 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 and a hi, he, he, and all that kind of stuff.
Bah humbug.
Yeah.
Hello.
It's our usual Christmas podcast.
It is.
But it's not our usual Christmas podcast because after years and years and years,
for that.
it seems like it, of listening to various people not improve on previous versions of the Christmas song and Little Drummer Boy and various other things.
Oh, pum, pum.
More of that later. We decided, actually, sod that. So this is one of our special podcasts that we do every now and again, but we haven't done one for quite a while.
The Olympics.
Yeah, I think it was the Olympics. That's quite a while, yeah.
Yes, that counts as quite a while.
So anyway, the general kind of idea behind this particular podcast was for us each to pick 3 albums that we consider underappreciated or lost classics, or ones that just generally should be brought to the wider attention, perhaps, of the listening public. Well, our very limited listening public, admittedly, but you know what I mean. And that's as kind of loose as the criteria was, really. It wasn't trying to say it had to be by obscure artists. In fact, several of them, the ones we discussed, are not by obscure artists, but just ones that we kind of thought had either got forgotten about or perhaps people could do with reminding of. So, in this podcast, we are going to review music from The Elder by Kiss, Pet Shop Boys Release, Fishbone, Truth and Soul, 9 Inch Nails with Teeth, Spirit, The 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus, and David Bowie, Outside, or One Outside if you're being particularly kind of pedantic.
I am. And listeners will recognise who picked what, I think.
Possibly. But the way we're going to do is, I think we're going to start off with the person that suggested it, saying why they suggested it, and then the other person responding, rather than our usual manner of doing these things.
That's good. No, I like that. Glad you explained the rules to me.
So I guess that means it's me first then, isn't it? So we're going to start off with, we're going to go back to 1981. We're going to go back to the 9th album by Kiss. And it's one of those kind of things you're thinking, there you are, one of the biggest rock bands in the world. Loved by your fans, selling lots of records, but kind of feeling unloved by the critics. Never really getting you, always just thinking you're kind of making this throwaway kind of, not quite bubblegum rock, but not far off it. So kind of looked down upon, as it were. Mm. And you're also in a world where Pink Floyd have released The Wall, and it's sold bucket loads, and you kind of go, why can't we do that? So you call up the producer of their album, Bob Enteridge, and say, Bob, come over. You hire an orchestra, you hire a choir, and you go, okay, let's work on our masterpiece. And you do. And then you release your album, and nobody buys it. The vast majority of Kiss fans hated this record when it came out. Critics, ironically, actually were quite kind to it. Actually, the reviews of the album were actually genuinely quite positive. However, the band, following the fans, quickly abandoned the record themselves too. And to give a quote from let's do Paul Stanley's quote, which, it was just folly. I'm not ashamed of it, but that and the movie Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, and believe me, if you haven't seen that, you really should. It's a classic. Stand out as us getting off at the wrong exit. So that's the kind of thing you've got going here. I got this album as a Christmas present.
Did you?
In Christmas 1981.
Wow.
Thank you, my brother, Phil. And as I said, I was a Kiss fan. I owned all the previous Kiss albums. Thought Kiss Alive 2 was one of the best records ever made. It's still one of the best live, quote-unquote, live albums of all time. But I love this. The kind of whole pomp and kind of ridiculousness of it just appealed to me greatly. And I just kind of thought, this is just bonkers, but fun bonkers. And in fact, unfortunately, we were reviewing the 1997 remaster of it.
That was really unfortunate.
Yeah, rather than the original, which had all the spoken bits in it, which made it really, really silly. However, the thing is, despite all the things that are easy to knock about the kind of pomposity of the record and pomposity of the lyrics, this album for me still contains some of Kiss's best material. So you've got songs like, for me, A World Without Heroes, which contains, still for me, Gene Simmons' best vocal performance on any Kiss song. Just a boy! Under the Rose, Dark Light, and I, which is just ridiculous, over the top, typical kind of Kiss in a way, and that's the one that I thought people would like more. Lou Reed co-writes several of the lyrics on this album. That's how bizarre this record is. And Cher did a quite amusing and quite nice cover version of A World Without Heroes on her 1991 album Love Hurts. And it just, for me, going back to it, remains one of the few Kiss albums I can come back to and put on and listen to from start to finish and still kind of go, you know what, I still really like this record. And so, all you other Kiss fans that didn't buy it, you were wrong. Beat!
Hey! Oh my goodness, you made me listen to this record. I'm quite amused by the quote here that in 2006 Q magazine ranked this actually below Oasis' Standing on the Shoulder of Giants.
Above, actually.
Sorry, above.
Yeah.
Above?
Yeah, 44th in their list of worst albums, as opposed to...
Okay, okay, so it was Oasis' album was better than this.
Yeah.
Yeah, according to that particular list. And you know what, if we ever run this exercise again, I've now made a mental note. Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, don't I? Make a case for that. Anyway, this album was a fascinating experience. It was one of the most bizarre rock albums that we've listened to in the duration of.
And we have done it. We did do it. We did a Kiss album, didn't we?
Yeah, we've done a Kiss album. We've actually done some really bizarre rock albums this year as well, which has somehow worked. And in the spirit of this enterprise, I'm not going to take it too seriously, but I completely agree with you. Actually, A World Without Heroes and I are possibly classics, which leads one to wonder what happened the rest of the album. In retrospect, and I appreciate you probably still have some nostalgic lingering love for this record.
I do,
and I can see you making the case for it. Here's an example of a band that was known for doing one thing and then did something completely different. And any artist, and we've reviewed many and said the same thing over and over again. All credit to them for doing that. But no, something just doesn't quite click with this record. And I can see where perhaps the lack of appreciation, even from the fandom, possibly comes from. When you think about classic Kiss, and then put it up against this record, and you can think about those disappointed, white painted faces with the big black eyeshadow as they stunned. I read somewhere interesting while we were reviewing this album had never actually been done live. And it was only in more really recent times that they picked one or two tracks.
Yeah, that's mainly because there's a few annoying Kiss fans that now kind of like shout out requests for songs.
Do they pick this album?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So I guess time is a great healer. is the moral of that particular anecdote. I love the quote here that you've got. This would be our Tommy. No.
To be fair, Gene says that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. No, to be fair, he does. And hiring the producer of one of the greatest Pink Floyd albums does not a classic make. However, I can really appreciate the case that you've made for this, having listened to it. But of the 6 records, actually no, of the 3 records that you presented me with to listen to, this was my least favourite of the 3.
Okie dokie. we move on to 2002, and the Pet Shop Boys release. So, Pete, why are we listening to this one?
So this is your chance now to have revenge. My 3 records have a theme, and my overarching theme for the 3 that I picked was very much an artist or a band hitting the reboot button. It kind of applies strongly to 2 of the records. One of the artists less so because he hits the reboot button every time he releases a record. But this was very much a reset for the Pet Shop Boys after the critically mauled and less favourable albums of the late 90s, Bilingual and Nightlife, and particularly after Nightlife, which had been a stonking opus of gay disco music. There was a sense in the Pet Shop Boys camp to sort of scale it back and do something that was the complete reversion of the previous album, which is a format that they have followed mostly throughout their career. So they decided to do a Paul McCartney and Wings and do a stripped back dirty rock album. They went on a student and small venue tour to promote it.
Yeah, they played unis and stuff, didn't they?
And they played unis and stuff, and they got rid of all the sort of fancy pants costumes and productions on their videos as well. And they got a few sort of students and art house directors to do these little videos that actually was sort of filmed on homemade cameras and stuff to promote the singles that were associated with this album. This album does not score highly with the critics. It does not score highly with general Pethead fandom.
So we're in similar territory as the Kiss album, really.
Yeah, it's in a similar territory, exactly, and that's why I picked it. And I'll be honest with you, despite your love for the Kiss album, I'm not a big fan of this album either. To me, it's better than its immediate predecessor.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not in my top half of Pet Shop Boys albums. So I'm making a case for a record here. I can see the value, and I went with the theme. It's undervalued and underrated, so that's the theme I'm running with. It does begin with a bit of a classic, Home and Dry, which was probably the biggest hit from the album. Mm-hmm. And it has very much a Beatles leaning throughout Home and Dry, and certainly I Get Along, which a little bit of politics was the Tony Blair ballad.
Beatles leaning via Oasis.
Via Oasis, and I think that's the trap it falls into. But I'm not here to critique it. I'm here to stand up for it.
That's my job.
Yeah, no, that's your job. I find that this album it strips everything back. And at the time they released it, they described it as a new Pet Shop Boys sound. And when you saw the album live, it actually came across very well, and in many ways was prescient, as have several of their albums been, including the 2 I just mentioned, of other acts that were to follow within a year or two. I mean, with Bilingual, we had the whole late 90s Latin thing. With Nightlife, the immediate predecessor, it was very much a forerunner to the Scissor Sisters' career. Yeah. And with this album, it ranges very much from Keane through to Coldplay. And at its best moments, you could even hear the Killers. So it was, in many respects, a forerunner, but also a palate cleanser. From this base, they got themselves a little bit of indie cool. Not necessarily with the critics, not necessarily with their traditional fan base, but they got themselves a little bit of indie cool. And from this point onwards, they were able to build on that. And we had I would say in the 10 to 12 years that followed, perhaps one of their more successful, apart from their imperial heyday, probably one of their most successful phases of their career, with albums such as Fundamental and Yes that followed this. It allowed them to sort of experiment and yet return to form.
Which is also, again, what most fans would say is similar about the Kiss album, that after that they kind of like kicked in and produced 2 of what Kiss fans consider generally to be amongst their best records.
Indeed.
Do you really want me to talk about this?
Go on.
First of all, was this the one we went to the album launch for?
Yeah, I could have been at this one.
Because
no, that was another time.
That was another one. Okay. Yeah. You know how much I used to love the Pet Shop Boys?
Yes. Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not at all. This album is why. This album is dreadful.
Yeah. Go on.
No, it really is. It starts off, and it's Mike and the Mechanics. Then it's Oasis.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and I'm saying that those two are the better tracks on the album.
Mm.
Then it just gets really, 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 really dull and bland, and just it's a weird. I had a weird experience listening to this album, because I was thinking, theoretically, this album should be my Pet Shop Boys album, because it's the rock.
It is the rock album. Johnny Marr on guitar.
Yeah, but it just sounds, I don't know, bland. I mean, it's all kind of one paced. It's all kind of bit dirgy. It's lacking the kind of, even at my most Pet Shop Boys hatingness level, I always admired the kind of sense of humour and sense of fun and lyrical inventiveness that was there in the songs. None of that here, really. And some of it just felt like, bizarrely, like you'd gone back in time and got onto a really bad cruise, and the kind of cruise band were these two blokes who were pretending to be the Pet Shop Boys, but not. And yeah, it's. I'm trying to think. I mean, Love is what it is.
Love is a Catastrophe.
Love is a Catastrophe, and Here, kind of all right.
Yeah.
And I was almost saved briefly by those two tracks. But by the time You Choose finished, I was asleep, and quite literally last night when I was on my third listen of it, I was literally asleep by that track. Yeah, Birthday Boy, which is apparently a song that it has got quite a slagging.
Yeah.
Of previously. If you ignore the fact that it is seriously overly long, I mean, seriously overly long. It's 6.5 minutes long. It's not that bad. And as you said, I have seen them doing it live on YouTube clips and stuff, and it comes across much better there than it does on the record. So as you're saying, this may be definitely a case of an album where the material comes across better in a live experience than it does on record. On record, it was just really, really flat, and yeah, I was surprised how much, bizarrely, with my new kind of positive, huggy, don't mind the Pet Shop Boys kind of thing.
To take the credit for that.
Hat on,
but yeah.
I kind of thought, no, this reminds me of all the things. Except it doesn't, because it was the previous albums that I've actually kind of warmed to slightly. But I can understand why this has been mostly forgotten, to be honest.
It has, and I agree with you on some of that. This album very much allowed them to move on and to build something that was new. And very much after this album, they entered a second phase of their career. Because there was a feeling, particularly amongst fans, that during the late 90s in particular, that was a difficult time to be a Pet Shop Boys fan.
Yeah,
because, there was the glories of yesteryear, and the output perhaps wasn't as commercially successful as it used to be, although it remained critically successful. And this album was very much, as I say, the reset or the reboot button. It allowed them to do something that was personal, that was very different to anything that they would do before or since, and then actually, I mean, even within 12 months of this record coming out, there was a remix record based on it. Here got turned into a really good classic disco stomper of Pet Shop Boys nature that you probably appreciate.
Of course,
look it up if you get a chance. And in fact, about a year later, they released Disco 3, and The Enemy was just like, they're back.
Yeah.
This oddball collection of B-sides, remixes and other oddities was actually, seen as something of a comeback. And of course that was followed by an amazing greatest hits collection and an absolutely brilliant album a couple of years later in Fundamental. So in my mind, this is undervalued with good reason, but underappreciated in what it meant in terms of their career.
Okie dokie. 2 down, 4 to go. We've already been talking a lot, it's amazing. Okay, back to me, and it's back to 1988, and the second album, third if you count the EP, which some people do, they're wrong. Second album by Fishbone, Truth and Soul, and again going back to 1988, this is the time where I was still very much a metal fan, but also listening to other things and seeing what was going on. And I don't remember the album coming out per se, but I remember hearing Scott, not Ian, who was the guitarist in Anthrax, talking about it and wearing a t-shirt at gigs and stuff. And this is about the same time where he was also bigging up Public Enemy at the same time. And I'd followed his lead with the Public Enemy thing, so I thought, actually, yeah, Public Enemy pretty good. So I thought, let's do the same with Fishbone, because they sounded interesting. And by his description, they were kind of like, you got his band, they're a kind of ska band that play rock and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, it'd be interesting. Although, we already had The Clash, of course, our classic ska band that played rock, or rock band that played ska. However, bought this record, thought, let's give it a go. And within the first few bars of their hard rock version of Curtis Mayfield's classic Freddy's Dead, I was just hooked. So I thought, okay, this rocks, man. Really rocks. I was thinking, oh, great, it's going to be one of those albums. And it gets to the end. And suddenly you just go into a couple of tracks of just pure, laid-back, happy ska music. With Ma and Pa and Question of Life, which is just totally kind of, yeah, kind of stuff. And that's the thing I love about this album. It's a beautiful, or annoying, depending on your point of view, cacophony of hard rock, punk, ska and funk. This is the album that the Red Hot Chili Peppers have been trying to make for their entire career, as far as I'm concerned. And it's just great. It's lyrically, there's lots of... If you ignore stuff like Boning in the Boneyard, which, as Angelo Moore, the lead singer, said, when someone said, what's this song about? He kind of went, it's about boning in the boneyard. Most of the lyrics are actually about race and racism and this and that. So it was quite on the money that way. And it's just still now I was playing on the way home tonight, and still the kind of mixture of the metal, the kind of, at the end you've got a kind of like basically kind of acoustic guitar ballad, because like big funk, some really great bass playing, particularly on One Day, some really funky bass. In fact, they didn't use the exact same term. And a record that still for me stands up really, really well. It came out at a time where you had, I should say, most of the band are black, and obviously it was a time where you had bands like Living Colour, 24/7 Spies, all these bands coming out that were doing rock, proving that black people could do rock as if black people couldn't do rock. But unlike them, Fishbone were trying to do everything, and possibly because they tried to do everything and still try to do everything, they've never really had the commercial success that this album, at least, certainly deserved. Pete?
I think this is going to be one where we're close to agreeing. This is a short and very enjoyable record. In terms of one of the things that we've picked up on, and particularly in the last year or two through the podcast, is bands that find it hard to sort of settle down with a particular sound.
Yeah.
And this is only their second album, and they're already experimenting with different sounds. You can see that the bass funk is still there, but you've got a little bit of thrash, a little bit of rock, a little bit of other things thrown in as well. And actually, I think overall this record sort of settles quite well.
Yeah.
Together. And one of the better tracks for me was actually one of the shortest. Really enjoyed Subliminal Fascism.
It's a classic.
It's a classic. And I think for me that sums up everything about the band. It's commentary, good lyrics, good music, mishmash of styles, but in a very positive way. And I actually, of the three that you recommended, this is probably the one I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, okay.
You know, that's not to say that. Anyway, comes to that in a moment. Yeah, no, I felt this is a really good album. I think it deals with second album syndrome very well.
Yeah.
And we've talked before about artists that have kind of tried to do that, but actually no. I think this album for me was a very enjoyable record and is certainly underrated. So
back to you, and perhaps people would say slightly predictably. Actually, probably the thing that most people are going to do when they get to the end of this podcast is, and they're going to be thinking, why is it not Depeche Mode at the end rather than David Bowie? But apart from that, so 9 Inch Nails,
okay, yeah,
with Teeth,
people that know me,
2005,
one for next time perhaps.
Yeah, fourth album.
Again, for me, underrated in terms of its impact on the artist in question. And again, that reset button with the album immediately preceding the double-edged. Well, it might have been the double LP Fragile, which was just epic in terms of its scope, which in itself had to do the follow-on act for the Downward Spiral, which is considered by many to be the classic.
Wrongly.
Okay. With Teeth. Is again, it's the palate cleanser. It's a guy going back into the studio, having gone quite some way to getting over a number of personal and professional demons.
Mostly personal, yes.
And mostly personal. And actually sitting down and said, right, I'm going to record a Nin record for the first time in yonks. The fans are going to expect some sort of convoluted, very carefully constructed epic. And I'm just going to go in and do a rock album. In my style, which is exactly what he does. This is just a rock album, but it's a very listenable album. This is probably one of the most mainstream albums I think he's ever done in terms of his career and in terms of the Nin sound. The Nin sound. You know, there are some great tracks on here that are fairly reflective of the themes that he carries forward. You know, we have great radio friendly songs like Every Day Is Exactly the Same, and with Sunspots you've got the hint of that Nothing Can Stop Me Now self-destruction theme that's run throughout his career.
Dark and brooding.
The dark and brooding, nothing can stop me now thing that's run there forever. But you also have, you know, The Hand That Feeds, which is another classic sort of Nin single. And a number of the other themes that he touches on around relationships, drugs, death, life, and all that. So it has the right amount of distortion in industry, and yet to me,
Tish, I like it.
You like
Very
it. Good. But at the same time, I think this is probably his cleanest, in all senses of the word, his cleanest rock record. And for that reason, I think it's underappreciated. Particularly, again, it comes at a point in his career where the past is clearly behind him, and by doing this, clear the decks, then we can move back on to Year Zero, Ghosts, all the soundtrack stuff that would...
Stop with the fucking soundtrack stuff, seriously.
Go on.
Yeah, I agree. This is the rock album. In fact, the at various points on the album, if you kind of go for, you know, hand that feeds, you know what you are, getting smaller, it is the metal album.
It's the metal album, yeah.
And because obviously he was doing a metal album, he obviously roped in the nicest man in rock, trademark, Dave Grohl, to do the drumming. Yeah. And there's some serious drumming on the album, and this is actually one of my favourite Nin albums, possibly because of the rockness. However, bizarrely, I think it also contains, in the kind of non-outwardly rocky stuff, particularly if you take the opening and closing tracks, All Love in the World and Right Where It Belongs. Two of the best songs that Trent has ever written, in my opinion. Both very much in his plinky-plonky mode of background sound, but actually both really, really, really nice, I suppose, ballads, for want of a better word. It's hard to call Trent Reznor songs ballads, but it is kind of ballads.
All the Love in the World is really demonstrates his love of dance music, which is often forgotten, but is clearly apparent throughout his entire career. And Right Where It Belongs, I mean, I know we were reviewing the standard. Of course, the UK version has a real ballady version of that tucked away right at the end as well, which is really, really strong track. But yeah, it's an album. It's an album that I do like, and I said it is probably one of my of Nin's back catalogue. It's one of the ones that I come back to more often than not. So actually, this was a popular choice with me. Yes, likewise, actually. No, I couldn't agree more. So we go back, the furthest we go back in this podcast. I've decided to drag Pete back to 1970. Well, I remember it well. And fourth album from Californian band Spirit, The 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus. I've chosen this partly, and well, again, I blame my brother for this one really, and my age just generally. And this is one of those records that I don't think was necessarily underappreciated, although it didn't do, when it was originally released, didn't sell bucket loads. It became more popular as the 70s went on, kind of thing, and the Spirit went on, people kind of went back to it. But because Spirit aren't really a name that people know. If you say Spirit, people aren't going to go, oh yeah, Spirit, that's the band that did X, Y, Z. Incidentally, they did do a really good song that later became the start of Stairway to Heaven, but there's a legal case still ongoing about that particular aspect. They were just one of those bands that, for me, amongst friends and people that know music, just kind of seemed to have fallen through a crack. So you've got people that know about bands of the period, the classic bands of the period, obviously the Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks, the Who, the Byrds, the Doors. Yeah, the Doors. even Mr. Rundgren, in fact, you know, Ping. Yeah. Ping. But this album is one that I've come back to many times over the years. Again, nice, perfect length album, as I would call it. It's under 40 minutes. Classic, kind of like 20 minutes aside kind of thing. 12 tracks, as you might imagine, from the title of the album. And it's just a really good pop record, is probably the best way of describing it, really. Starts off with kind of Nothing to Hide and Nature's Way with Animal Zoo. Just really, really, really strong pop tunes. Not only pop tunes for the 1970, but pop tunes for now, frankly. Mr. Skin equally. Slagged off at the time, particularly that track particularly, but it's just a cracking track. Including the and that's the thing I love. It's got early Moog, vibraphone, reverse tape sounds. Space Child is very much Rundgren-esque. At the same time that Todd was starting to do something very similar, so you could probably say Todd was Spirit-esque, equally. Exactly. Backward ping. Backward. Citation. Backward citation ping. Backward citation ping. Okay. And I just think this is there are a couple of tracks that are a bit kind of but generally speaking, particularly the first half of the album, I think is still just a pure joy. So I brought this out simply because I love the first half of the album so much, and because it is genuinely an album that is forgotten, and most people should know more about this record. Yeah, I agree with that last statement completely. More people should. I didn't know anything about Spirit until this podcast, this exercise. People should know more about Spirit, and I also agree with the comment you said. I mean, there's some good pop tunes on here that would probably stand up even today. Yeah. And you mentioned Todd. I often when I listen to an album like this, and I kind of get that feeling of the White Album. And I think
very much so.
This is kind of how the Beatles could have been had they continued. It sort of very much follows down that White Album, George Harrison route of psychedelic rock, which is a real joy to listen to. So I really enjoyed this record. And I'm going to take back what I said earlier. This was up there with the Fishbone record in terms of enjoyment, and in particular tracks like Nature's Way, as you say, and Mr. Skin, brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, why isn't this record better known? Why isn't the artist better known?
Pink did sample a track of Fresh Garbage off their, I think, following album on one of the previous singles, but.
Right. Good.
Apart from that, that's as much as they've got recently.
That's the only exposure it's got, which seems a shame. So I would encourage anyone to pick up this record and listen to it.
So we finish with David Bowie,
Oh, David.
as he's known on the podcast.
David Bowie. How could we not do a special podcast without mentioning David?
This is true. What a fantastic death abyss.
Yeah, tell the others. David Bowie, if you're being pedantic, one outside.
You are, so go on.
Yeah. This album, again, I'm kind of pushing my theme of the reset button a little bit here. But actually, this is the first time he worked with Eno for many years.
It was, yes.
And in many ways...
Was it the first time since Lodger?
Yeah. Yeah. And in many ways, I felt that this, in a similar kind of way, reinvigorated him and reinvigorated his career for the albums and times to follow. This album was... Bowie does an experimental album. Really? Of course he does. He doesn't, So unlike my other two choices, that element doesn't come as a surprise.
Yeah, how do you follow up the Bit of Suburbia soundtrack album?
Well, that was my point. I mean, as much loved as that was, this I felt was a real kind of a reset in terms of what Bowie was doing in the mid-90s and what he was aiming to do, and some of the influences he was listening to at the time. Got to a point now in his career where bands that were coming through, like Nin, were clearly influenced by Bowie. You got other bands at the other end of the spectrum, like Neil Tennant and the Pet Shop Boys, vocally and artistically, lyrically, had also been influenced by Bowie. Point to return to. So this album, in many ways, when I was in the middle of my heavy Nin phase,
Yeah.
this very much reached out to me. I said, "Oh, God, of course I knew about David Bowie," but at the same time, I was like, "Oh, he does stuff that actually is actually current, and I can listen to it. It's great, and it's doing the Heart's Filthy Lesson, and it's Hello Space Boy, and it's all industrial,
which are both pure Nin. Yes,
yeah,
very
Nin influenced. But at the same time, then you realise that Nin itself was, anyway. But at the same time, what the revelation for me has been listening to this album for the umpteenth time, but re-listening to it for this particular podcast, has been actually how classic Bowie it is in places as well. When you've got tracks like "Strangers When We Meet" and
strange. It's strange you say that. I'm going to put in for this, but it's strange to say that because I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking, as bizarre a record as this is.
Yeah.
It's still a record where he decided to stick Strange Way of Meeting, which could sit on virtually any Bowie album of any decade,
previous 20 years,
and not be out of place.
Exactly, prior to this release, and other things like "I've Not Been to Oxford Town," and this album very much pointed backwards, but also pointed forwards to the albums like "Hours" that followed it, and albums ultimately. Such as "Heathen," it was pointing in that direction, but
he went all kind of drum and bass.
Then he went all drum and bass
before that, though.
This, however, has, in comparison to those later records, this had the absolutely wonderful concept, or even conceit, of the art detective operatic mystery running through it, which is just classic Bowie doing crazy segues and
see, unlike the Kiss album, no one has yet edited out all Bowie's sleeve voices in this.
No, exactly. So it's a nice comparison to make, because this is actually silly voices done well.
Yeah, well, I don't say their voices are done well, but the songs are good.
Yeah, the songs are great, and the concept of the art detective is one that has stayed with me. So this is why I put this one forward as perhaps one of his more underrated, but yet actually great Bowie records. And of course, one more thing. Obviously, I've mentioned Nin, I've mentioned the PSB. Both are connected to this album via remixes.
They are indeed. It's a special ting as opposed to a ping for that one. You know when you chose this, because we have discussed this album tediously, frankly.
Privately?
Yeah.
I thought this was a chance for us to air it.
Because we're both a big fan of this record. And we're in a unique group. Although there are lots of people, Bowie fans, that think this is a great record. Similarly, there are loads that are glad that the originally planned parts 2, 3 and 4 never emerged.
I don't know, I'm curious.
Yeah. But again, this is the recording of the last Bowie album, where you're going, we've got recorded enough stuff for about 3 albums. You know, it's that kind of thing. But actually, I think this is actually a perfect album to be reviewing ahead of the next Bowie release, because if the stuff that's been kind of previewed so far off the new Bowie album is anything to go by, it certainly fits in more with the kind of esoteric stuff that's on this record than on the last Bowie album. So, by which I mean it's kind of more kind of experimental jazz type thing that you get on Small Plot of Land, and to a certain extent in the middle of Hearts of Lesson as well. There's equally a bit of that, and The Motel, which I think is one of the best tracks on this album, which is very much that kind of jazz infused kind of piano thing, with a bit of guitar in the middle that's pretty much self-referential back to a guitar sound used in Diamond Dogs. But it is, again, as you said, listening to this album again, I listened to it earlier on in the year, actually. But when I listened to it again this last couple of weeks, it says you're thinking, oh yeah, I forgot about that little bit, and even some of the silly bits, like We Prick You, I'd forgotten how funny We Prick You is as a song, and just genuinely catchy. It's a great. I don't think at the time of the album came out, they've still got a great pop song it was. We've already touched on When Strange When You Meet. As you said, it is just bizarre, classic Bowie thing, just kind of like thrown in. The Nin influence is fairly obvious. Hearts of Lesson is actually, would probably even now rank in my top 10 favourite Bowie songs of all time.
Wow.
Always a song I liked. Really liked it when it came out. Had a great video. Really like it now.
Had a great remix.
Yeah. Hello Space Boy.
Had an especially good remix.
It did, but this is where I'm going to be ping worthy, but also relate it back to Nin. It's funny actually. The Pet Shop Boys took a very similar approach to Hello Space Boy as Todd took to the Nin track. When they both thought, what this track needs is more of me stroke us.
Yeah. Singing.
So put themselves in
that bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Indeed.
So
Agree.
So that was quite amusing, and this is, one of my favourite Bowie albums. So it's a great choice. It's one that I think all true Bowie fans, or even Bowie fans, love. But it was a difficult record for pop Bowie fans, and I have a strange feeling that the upcoming Bowie album will fit into the same category.
I have a feeling too. So yeah, Paddy, all together now. Fantastic Death Abyss.
Right, that's the end of that one. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Wow.
And we'll see you for the end of year roundup. We spoke for 44 minutes. You've been listening to the CTTV Music Podcast.